Welcome to the STARS program, seniors taking active roles in society. And now, here's your host, ANITA FINLEY.
Now on the phone, calling in from Staten Island. Good morning, Darwin.
Good morning to you, Anita, and welcome to December. It's certainly been a morning that will live in history.
Yes.
The moment it began, I was watching CNN when the news broke of the death of George Herbert Walker Bush, born in 1924 and dead at 94. And as you know, you and I did a program on the death of Barbara Bush.
Yes.
So his Bush. Ironically, were you? I'm just interested. How did you hear the news?
Oh, when I got up at 4 o'clock this morning, I had my cell phone, and it came on.
4 hours late.
Sorry, well, I'm not like you. You're a nighthawk. But, you know, I have to tell you, after reading, as I was doing some things, and I put it on so I could hear, he really, you know, whether you liked his politics or not, he certainly was an American. He certainly did everything he could in his own way to be good for America. I
totally agree with you. I mean, even basically, I thought he was probably the finest and most decent president we had. I didn't like some of the handlers behind him, but
true,
who were sort of killers. But he was fine. He didn't like to campaign. He said, "I prefer to govern instead of campaign." But first, you know, I just want to tell you, you know, I've studied his life and career for many, many years. And one thing that struck me is we see these pictures of George and Barbara deep into December of their lives. And there are very little pictures that surface of what they look like in the early 40s at the dawn of World War II. First, he was the handsomest, and most people agree on this, the handsomest president of the 20th century. I mean, he was like a matinee idol. I've got pictures of him. My God, he could compete with Robert Taylor and Tyrone Power.
Really?
And Barbara was a very good-looking woman. And, you know, then time moved on. As Marilyn Monroe saying, we all lose our charms in the end. But they kept going, and remarkably so.
Well, Darwin, excuse me, I was impressed with his war record. Here's a very wealthy young man. He had everything. He gives up going to Yale to be able to go into the war, and he really fought a tough war.
Woo. And and his plane was shot down.
Yeah, so...
And he survived that, fortunately, thanks to a submarine. And also, at the age of 20, he became the youngest naval officer in the U.S. Navy.
I read that.
At the age of 20.
Yeah, that was really something, wasn't it?
Just getting over being a teenager. And so it was a great thing. And now, he has many records. You know, his marriage to Barbara lasted 73 years.
Yeah.
My goodness, that's a long... Now, they had their ups and downs, and in our last show, we talked about them. But if you're married to anyone for nearly three-quarters of a century, you're going to have low points in the marriage. But their love endured, and they did many wonderful things.
And they had a lot of children, too. And I read, I didn't know that, they did lose a child, 4 years old. Yeah.
That's 4. In fact, the first cartoon I've seen after the death, they posted it on the television, was he's flying his World War II plane, and Robin and Barbara are waiting for him in heaven.
Yeah, that's something.
That was so charming. But I want to tell you some things that are not generally known. First, in 1980, let's just call him George. You know, I'm not talking about the son, the daddy. George ran against the president, eventual President Ronald Reagan, in the campaign, and as I said, George was not a campaigner. He liked to govern, but not campaign. And he said, my God, how can I compete with a man who practically since he was 23 has done nothing but face a movie camera, and then when his career faded, he was the host of General Electric, so he knows all the angles on TV.
Yeah.
And, of course, Reagan won. Now, Reagan decided at first to name Gerald Ford his vice president. And that would be unique for a president of the United States, of course, one not elected, but he was president, would be a vice president. That was astounding, I thought. It would certainly be unique. And then, but at the last minute, he decided maybe he would call George Bush. And I was amazed at the question Reagan asked. He said he was mainly concerned, will you support a pro-life agenda? The most important thing I thought Reagan asked was about a woman's choice to choose. I thought that was very, very strange. And
probably, probably because when you're a Hollywood actor, you become a little bit more liberal.
Yes, and then of course, Reagan. I once wrote a book about his early years. In 1937, he was denied membership in the Communist Party because they considered him too flaky. And for most of
I didn't.
for most of his. Well, of course, you realize in the Depression 30s, many people were. Even Lucille Ball joined the Communist Party. Desi later said, the only thing red about Lucy is her hair, and even that's not genuine. but anyway, and then up until he got connected with General Electric, Reagan was a Democrat.
Yes.
He campaigned with Lauren Bacall for Harry S. Truman. But the most important thing was that Barbara, who was much more liberal than her husband, would support the Republican platform, which outlawed abortion. And Bush promised he would. And he stood by Reagan, and he supported him throughout 8 years. And he knew that at the end that Reagan was beginning to fail. As the world knows, he got Alzheimer's, and he was already in the he became very forgetful there at the end, and sometimes he couldn't make appearances. So George was rehearsing the presidency, and then of course he ran for president and won, beating Mike Dukakis in a very nasty campaign called the Willie Horton campaign.
Yes,
very nasty, and but he became a remarkable president. And I mean, he made a lot of mistakes, and he was the first to admit it. But, of course, he presided over the Desert Storm, knocking Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait, which he had invaded. And he saw the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Empire. And he did announce this is the end of world communism, but he warned America. He said, let's don't gloat. Let's just reunite with the new forces of the world and don't say, we won.
Yeah.
Because the struggle will go on. So he was very calm doing that. And what only some people may remember when he was up for re-election in 1992, he had just had a 91% approval rating. I think our president right now has 35, and some presidents have lingered under 50. So that was remarkable. It was probably because of Desert Storm. And then he made the fatal mistake. He had, at the convention, and I'm sure you saw it, he said, "Read my lips."
I remember that.
You remember
No,
that?
right. No new taxes.
No new taxes. And then a recession had set in, and the economy was tanking, and there was a sudden $500 billion debt, and he was told he needed, Social Security was threatened. Senior citizens sure didn't want to hear that. And then he had to go against but he said, this will probably cost me the election, but it's good for the country. And a great leader should do things good for the country and not for his political future. My God, in Washington today, with Congress at 8% approval rating, we don't hear things like that.
Right, exactly.
And then he still might have won, but then Mr. Also Pat Buchanan came along and really, it was almost like a foreshadowing of politics today. I mean, I'll just run through a few things that Pat Buchanan, he suggested we build a wall between the United States and Mexico.
Oh, I forgot that.
And he suggested that Muslims particularly be limited in immigration to this country. In fact, all immigration should be, legal or otherwise, should be strictly controlled.
And what year was that? I'm sorry.
92.
No kidding.
And, I mean, I could go on down the list, but what is incredible is the Pat Buchanan created all of these things that we're fighting about today. They had to originate somewhere, right? Right. And it's amazing. I just, they replayed Pat Buchanan's speech last night at 3:30 when you were still sound asleep.
Right, almost.
Bless you.
Right.
And it was like a speech taken from today. I just thought it was amazing. And then, of course, George got the nomination, and then there appeared Ross Perot, a third candidate, and I'm sure you remember him.
Oh, yes.
And what happened is he took a lot of the votes that would have gone for George Bush, and that allowed Bill Clinton to become the nominee of the Democratic Party and the president with 43% of the vote. Mm. I'm saying all these things off the top of my head.
Yeah, that's great. You have a great memory, of course.
And then this was a moment in history because it was the beginning of where the baby boomers of the world, of America, assume control of the government after the what was called the Greatest Generation. Of course, Tom Brokaw created that in his book, and of the Greatest Generation. And in a sense, they were. In the sense, they won World War II. My God, we might be speaking German today, so sure. We owe a great debt to our fathers and mothers, and they were a great generation.
Yep. That's well said. I love how you put this all together. Sure, when we thought we were going to talk this morning before you heard about ex-President Bush, you had something else in mind, didn't you?
Yes. I had a hot show that is sort of timeless.
Well, we have 15 minutes. Why don't we do that?
I could do that. Well, I don't know if I'm up for it right now.
Oh, really? Okay, maybe not then. Whatever you want to do.
Well, I can maybe do. It is still in a political vein, although not political. It's the media buzz over the last election, which is I didn't think the New York Times would the old gray lady. Well, the old gray lady isn't as gray as she used to be. And they ran stories about the rise of yet a new generation, and in a way that sort of tied in. In time, the baby boomers will have to abandon to the new generation. I mean, but that's what happens in life, and they are on the rise. And one example that was cited in the Times, plus many other newspapers, America, is like the Times commented on the sex appeal of some candidates. Now, normally, historically, there have only been two. John F. Kennedy was claimed the handsomest president of the 20th century. But during the campaign, just completed, well, it's not really completed. They're challenging North Carolina. But someone tricked people and hauled off the votes and hid them in North Carolina.
Oh, really?
That's another story.
Still? Yeah.
And Beto O'Rourke ran against Ted Cruz. And he lost, but only by 2.6 points. And the remarkable thing is, Texas is a very red state. Well, some people are comparing him to a new Kennedy. There's great pressure in America now for him to run. But a lot of people in Texas, particularly women, but some young men too, weren't really in tune with his politics, but they were in tune with him. Many, he has a beautiful wife named Amy, but many women wrote him and said, "Would you like a second wife?"
Really?
And he's not the handsomest man in the world, but the woman who wrote a book on beauty, she equated sex appeal doesn't necessarily mean beauty.
Right.
I mean, you could be beautiful, but not necessarily sexy.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
I mean, that was the case, say, with Marilyn Monroe, until she had some nose jobs done and a few things, and then she was probably more sexy than she was.
Oh, really? I don't know why you probably said that, but I didn't remember that.
No, I probably didn't.
Oh.
And so, but Beto O'Rourke of El Paso is just swept the. He went to every county in Texas, and it wasn't shown in many places, but in many places he was mobbed by women who were trying to pull off his clothes.
No kidding. I didn't know that.
It evoked a young Elvis Presley. And he was also, Ted Cruz then ran pictures of him, when he was young. Okay, let's be blunt. There were two arrests. One was at a university when he was with some boys who broke into a building, and I don't know really what they were after. And then there was one other arrest for driving while intoxicated, and he was young and he had long hair. But this is also what happens when you're coming with a new generation. Bill Clinton faced a lot of that.
Sure.
So he wanted to be a punk rocker. Well, so what? But that's what happened. But what happened that was amazing is how he appealed to such an audience. So many people approaching him now and asking him to begin to seek the presidency because he was a great fundraiser. And, of course, if he does that, there's going to be a real crowded field because there are at least 21 other candidates.
Amazing.
I mean, I don't ever recall how many a time, certainly not in my life, where so many people are vying to get a nomination. By the way, in your own state and my former state, I still view myself as a Floridian.
Okay.
Was your own candidate for governor, although he lost, he was also viewed as sort of a not in as much as Beto O'Rourke, but many people, certainly in the papers I read, viewed him as sort of a charismatic character. You may disagree. I don't know. I didn't follow Florida politics too closely, but of course he lost the campaign. And but did he get a lot of favorable press in Florida?
Well, he did, and he didn't lose by that. He lost by just a tiny bit.
Yeah. So he was listed on that list, and then of course there's not time for me to go into the young lady of Alexandria in the Bronx, who has become at 28 the youngest congresswoman ever to serve, and people say she's so beautiful that even though I advocate her same positions, it's coming from the mouth of someone so beautiful, you might not want to take her seriously.
No, but Darwin, and I'm not going to tell people, our December issue is going to have the most wonderful article about you. I mean, about this woman. Your article. Let me start over. Your article in our December issue is going to have an incredible article about a woman I was not named Jackie, who I was not even aware of, and after reading that, she is one heck of a woman.
Yes, right. She is indeed, and now that's yet another candidate. So it's going to be a tough race. But the thing that amazed me is, like the old gray lady. There was a column that, I swear this was in the New York Times. He's writing about the sexy armpits of Beto O'Rourke.
You're kidding.
Usually sweat in a candidate. I'll give you an example. They say now there is a politer word for sweat, but Nixon, when he debated John F. Kennedy in 1960, Nixon was sweating, perspiring, or whatever you want to call it, and good-looking Kennedy was calm, cool, and collected, and a lot of people commented that it was Nixon's sweating that cost him the election, and suddenly we live now to a time where having sexy armpit, Beto didn't bother to change his. He went before the people with his shirt soaked to show his passion. And of course, it was hot in Texas.
Right.
It's often hot in Texas. But it was interesting how times have changed over the decades, and we're reviewing candidates.
Well, I was really impressed that he did so well in Texas. Of course, his opponent didn't have much character, unfortunately, but he did win.
Well, the people who voted for Ted Cruz voted for his politics.
Yeah.
Not for his beauty.
Yeah.
What did Trump call him? Lion's head.
Yeah. Well. Yeah. I don't want to. I don't want to go into any of that. But I have to tell you that Beto, certainly, that's a weird name, isn't it?
Yes, but that's a nickname.
Oh.
That's a nickname that people. As I said, I wasn't really. I'm a little off the record because I've got too much bush on my head.
Okay.
This is a name that if your name ended in so and so in El Paso, particularly in the Spanish, you were called Beto. So Beto is a very, very common name in the El Paso area. The only reason I know that is I went to El Paso many years ago to research Debbie Reynolds, because she, like Beto, is from El Paso, and there were many people still alive who knew Debbie. She was Mary Frances back in El Paso, and I didn't know of. I only knew Beto has been congressman for 3 years, but the thing that was interesting to me about in the reports on the media, there's a poll now on everything, and certainly Beto is the number one sex appeal candidate. Now, among governors, the newly elected governor of California, Gavin Newsom, was voted the handsomest and sexiest governor.
Yeah, I thought he was. I've been watching him. He is, and I thought I was figuring he was going to run for president.
Yeah, he's another candidate that, although he's pledged to be the governor of California to serve out his term, and he's replacing Jerry Brown, who is 82 years old now. and so he's going to. Frankly, I wouldn't want to be governor of California right now because he's facing
terrible,
a great deal of devastation.
Mm-hmm. But
are you hearing me well?
I'm hearing you perfectly.
See, I'm calling you on a landline.
Oh,
again.
Okay. No, I'm hearing you perfectly.
It's the first time I've done
I've
that.
heard every single sentence and every laugh that you've made. It's been great.
Yeah. Well, I want to just end by acknowledging the wonderful contribution of the late president, and I'm so surprised that he formed a friendship with Bill Clinton, who beat him in 1992, and yet they formed a bond and became great friends and visited each other. I don't recall that ever happening in America, and the president always said that you got to walk across the line, and he hoped America would come together, and he lived for 25 years after being president, which I think, I'll have to check my files, but I think that may be a record. So he saw that many of the things that he advocated did not happen in America today, and I think that caused him a lot of pain. And
so I'm going to ask you a question. Let me ask you a question. So is Trump going to be allowed to come to the funeral?
Well, I think he will, because the funeral is going to be in the National Cathedral. Now, he didn't show up at the funeral of Barbara, but I think it's just, down from the White House, and I think it would almost dictate. His advisors, I think, will tell him to come to the funeral. He knew privately that George Bush did not like him and did not approve of his politics, and he did not like the drift of the party, which was not what he conceived as the party. But in politics, you have to put on a brave face, and Barbara Bush Barbara Bush and Nancy Reagan never forgave each other for their original campaign, but they always put on a brave face when they saw each other. In fact, the night that Reagan...
I have I have a brave face, and I have to say goodbye to you, and I was so happy that I got to talk to you.
It's been great talking to you.
Thank you, Darwin. It was a great show.
And a happy birthday and a Merry Christmas.
Okay, the same. Okay, thank you. You're wonderful. Bye.